Some wounds never heal. They just learn to sleep beneath the surface. For 30 years, Eli Yoder had carried the weight of losing both his wife and their stillborn daughter, finding solace only in the quiet rhythms of his Amish life. That October morning in 1887, he was walking the familiar pine woods of Pennsylvania when he heard a child crying. A little girl, no more than 7, sat lost and frightened beneath the trees. Her torn dress and dirt-streaked face tugged at his heart. He reached out to take her hand and lead her home. Then he saw it. A black, star-shaped birthmark on her palm. The same birthmark his wife had carried. The same mark his daughter had been. Born with 30 years ago, his blood turned cold. How could this strange child bear the mark of his buried family? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Pennsylvania hills like memories that refused to fade. Eli Yoder stood in his doorway, watching the sun climb over the ridge that bordered his 100-acre farm. At 63, his hands bore the calluses of 4 decades working this soil. His shoulders carried the particular stoop of a man who had bent to labor and sorrow in equal measure. His daily routine had become a prayer of sorts. Rise before dawn, tend the animals, work the fields until his body reminded him of every year he'd lived. The work kept his mind occupied, kept the ghosts at bay. Most days, anyway. This morning felt different. The air held that crisp promise of winter, but something else stirred beneath the familiar sense of hay and wood smoke. Something that made it diva. His chest tight with an old ache, he thought he'd learned to carry Dot inside his modest farmhouse. Everything remained exactly as it had been for 30 years. The wooden table where he took his meals alone. The single chair by the fireplace. The silence that had become his most constant companion. He had grown accustomed to the echo of his own footsteps, the sound of one plate being washed, one cup being dried. But it hadn't always been this way. The small wooden box on his bedroom dresser held the only remnants of the life he'd once planned. Inside, wrapped in a piece of faded blue cloth, lay Sarah's wedding ring, simple gold, worn smooth by her gentle hands. He rarely opened the box anymore. The sight of that ring could still bring him to his knees with the weight of what he'd did. Lost Sarah Byler had been 19 when they married, her eyes bright with the joy that seemed to flow from her like morning sunshine. She'd laughed at his clumsy attempts at romance, had seen past his quiet nature to something worthy of her love. Their courtship had followed the old ways supervised visits, long conversations about faith and family, shared dreams of children, and a life built on solid ground. The first years of their marriage had been sweeter than honey from his own hives. Sarah had transformed his bachelor's house into a home, filling it with the scents of fresh bread and lavender, the sounds of humming and gentle laughter. She'd sewn curtains for every window, planted flowers along the front porch, made everything beautiful with her touch. When she told him she was carrying their child, Eli had felt his heart might burst with joy. He'd spent evenings with his hands on her growing belly, talking to the baby about the farm, about the life they would build together. He'd carved a cradle from oak, sanded it smooth as silk, and painted it the pale yellow Sarah had chosen. Boy, or girl, this child will know love, she'd whispered on those quiet evenings when they'd sit together planning their future. This child will know what it means to belong. The birthmark had appeared when Sarah was 6 months along a dark, star-shaped mark on her right palm that seemed to deepen as her pregnancy progressed. The midwife, old Rebecca Stoltzfus, had never seen anything like it. Some in the community whispered it was a sign, though whether for good or ill, no one could say that Sarah had been untroubled by the mark. God's children come marked by his hand. In different ways, she'd said, tracing the star with her finger. Our little one will carry something special. The labor had been long and difficult. Rebecca worked through the night while Eli paced the kitchen floor, praying with every step. When the crying stopped, when the terrible silence filled the house, he'd known before. Rebecca's tears confirmed what his heart had already understood. Hannah Marie Yoder had lived only moments, long enough for Eli to hold her tiny form, to see the perfect miniature of Sarah's features, to notice the same star-shaped birthmark on her impossibly small palm, long enough for him to understand that love and loss could occupy the same heartbeat that Sarah never recovered. Not from the birth, not from the grief. She'd held their daughter for hours, whispering prayers and promises, singing lullabies to a child who would never hear them. When they finally laid Hannah to rest in the small plot behind the house, something in Sarah died with her. The months that followed blurred together in a haze of Sarah's declining health and Eli's desperate attempts to bring back her smile. She grew thinner, more distant, until it seemed she was already halfway to wherever Hannah had gone. The pneumonia that took her 8 months later felt almost like a mercy. She'd been trying to leave them since the day their daughter died. Eli buried Sarah beside Hannah under the old oak tree. The double headstones bore simple inscriptions: Sarah Yoder, beloved wife, and Hannah Marie Yoder, God's little angel. He'd stood at those graves for hours after the funeral, wondering how a man could feel so empty and still somehow keep breathing. The community had rallied around him in those early months of grief. Casseroles appeared on his doorstep. Neighbors helped with the harvest. The minister made regular visits to check on his spiritual welfare. But grief, Eli learned, was a solitary journey. Eventually, the visits grew less frequent. The offers of help politely declined. People had their own lives to live, their own families to tend. He'd thrown himself into the work of the farm with the single-minded intensity of a man trying to outrun his own shadow. The land demanded attention regardless of his heartache crops. To plant and harvest, animals to feed and tend, repairs that couldn't wait for his sorrow to subside. The physical exhaustion became his salvation, the only thing that allowed him to sleep at night. Years passed. Seasons turned. The acute pain of loss gradually settled into a dull ache that he carried like an old injury, always there but manageable. Most days, he learned to cook simple meals, to mend his own clothes, to find a kind of peace in solitude. His faith, though tested, remained his anchor. God's ways were mysterious, but his love endured. Somehow, that had to be enough. The community still welcomed him at Sunday services, still included him in the rhythms of their shared life. But he'd become something of a figure apart, the quiet widower who farmed alone, who spoke little but worked hard, who carried his grief with dignity. Children would sometimes stare at him with curious eyes, having heard whispered stories about the man who'd lost everything and somehow kept going. On this particular October morning, 30 years after Hannah's birth and death, Eli felt the familiar pull toward the woods that bordered his property. Walking these paths had become part of his routine, a way to clear his mind before the day's work began. The forest held a different kind of peace odor, deeper, removed from the human concerns that sometimes felt too heavy to bear. The pine trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches whispering secrets in the morning breeze. Eli knew every trail, every fallen log, every clearing where sunlight filtered through the canopy. This was where he came when the silence of his house became too loud, when the weight of memory pressed too hard against his chest. He'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when he heard a sound that stopped him cold. A child's voice, speaking the old language of his people, crying. His heart hammered against his ribs as he followed the sound through the underbrush. Children didn't come this deep into the woods alone. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and even the Amish children knew better than to wander so far from home. But there she was, huddled beneath a fallen log like a woodland creature seeking shelter. Her plain dress, though torn and dirty, marked her as one of his own people. Her dark hair escaped from a small prayer cap, and her face bore the streaks of recent tears. "Little one," he called softly in Pennsylvania Dutch, not wanting to frighten her further. "What are you doing so far from home?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. When she spoke, her voice carried the accent of their community, though there was something else there, a careful precision that suggested the words had been learned rather than lived. "I'm lost," she whispered. "I've been lost for so long." Eli's heart moved with protective instinct. Whatever had brought this child to his woods, she needed help. He knelt beside her, noting the scratches on her arms, the way she trembled in the cool morning air. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe now. Let me help you home." He reached for her small hand, intending to lift her to her feet. The moment his fingers touched her palm, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. There, dark against her pale skin, was a birthmark he recognized as surely as his own reflection. A perfect star, black as midnight, pressed into her flesh like a seal from another world. The same mark his beloved Sarah had carried. The same mark their daughter Hannah had borne in her brief moments of life. His breath caught, his vision blurred. For a heartbeat, he wondered if his years of solitude had finally stolen his sanity. But the child's hand was real in his. The birthmark was undeniably there. And somewhere in the chambers of his heart that had been closed for 30 years, something stirred to life. Eli's hand shook as he helped the child to her feet. The birthmark seemed to pulse with significance, a message written in a language he didn't dare interpret. He forced himself to focus on practical matters. The girl was cold, frightened, and clearly in need of care. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "Anna," she whispered, then added something that made his heart skip. "Anna Yoder." The surname hit him like a physical blow. Yoder was common enough among their people, but hearing it spoken by this child with Sarah's birthmark sent tremors through his carefully constructed world. "Where do you live, Anna? Where is your family?" Her small face crumpled with confusion. "I don't remember. I've been walking for so long, and everything looks the same. The trees, the paths, I thought I knew the way home, but I got lost." Eli studied her more carefully. She couldn't be more than 7 years old, small for her age, with the delicate features common among their community. Her dress, while torn and soiled from her time in the woods, was well made in the traditional style. But there was something about her that didn't quite fit a watchfulness in her eyes, a careful way of speaking that suggested she'd learned to guard her words. "Come," he said finally. "You need food and warmth. We'll sort out the rest once you're properly cared for." He lifted her easily. She weighed no more than a bag of grain and began the walk back to his farmhouse. She curled against his chest with a trust that both warmed and unsettled him. When was the last time he'd held a child? When was the last time someone had depended on him for comfort and safety? As they emerged from the woods, Anna's head lifted from his shoulder. Her eyes fixed on his house with an expression he couldn't read. Not recognition, exactly, but something close to it. A familiarity that should have been impossible. Inside, he set her down gently at his kitchen table and went about the business of caring for her immediate needs. Hot milk warmed on the stove while he retrieved clean clothes from the chest in his bedroom. Items that had belonged to Sarah. Kept all these years, though. He couldn't say why Anna accepted the milk gratefully, but said little. She seemed to be studying his house with intense curiosity, her gaze moving from the hand-hewn beams to the stone fireplace to the simple wooden furniture. When he returned with the clothes, she was staring at the rocking chair by the window, Sarah's chair, which he'd never had the heart to move. "That was hers, wasn't it?" Anna said softly. Eli froze. "What did you say?" "The chair. It belonged to a woman. Someone who loved to sit there in the mornings, watching the sun come up over the hills." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread through every corner of Eli's understanding. How could this child know about Sarah's morning ritual? How could she possibly know that his wife had spent countless dawns in that very chair, her hands busy with mending or knitting, her eyes turned toward the eastern horizon? "Who told you that?" he asked, though his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Anna looked confused. "Nobody told me. I just know it. The same way I know there used to be flowers planted along the front porch. Yellow ones and purple. Ones that smelled like heaven." Eli's legs gave out. He sank into his own chair, staring at this impossible child who spoke of things she couldn't know. Sarah had indeed planted flowers along the porch, marigolds and lavender that had filled their home with color and fragrance. But those flowers had died with Sarah 30 years ago. The porch had remained bare ever since, a testament to the beauty that had vanished from his life. "How do you know these things?" he managed. Anna's small shoulders lifted in a shrug. "I don't know. Sometimes I just know things. Like how you keep something special in a wooden box in your bedroom, something that makes you sad when you look at it." The world seemed to spin around him. Sarah's ring. How could this child know about Sarah's ring? He'd never spoken of it to anyone, never shared the private ritual of taking it out on the anniversary of their wedding, of holding it while memories crashed over him like waves. "Anna," he said carefully, "who are your parents? Where did you come from before you got lost in the woods?" For the first time since he'd found her, tears filled her eyes. "I don't remember," she whispered. "I remember being somewhere else, with people who weren't kind. Up before that, it's all fuzzy, like trying to see through water. Sometimes I have dreams about a woman with gentle hands who used to sing to me. She had a mark on her hand, like mine." She held up her palm, displaying the star-shaped birthmark that had started this bewildering encounter. "In my dreams, she would tell me stories about this place, about a man who worked hard and loved deeply, about a house where flowers grew and happiness lived." Eli's throat constricted. The description fit Sarah perfectly, her gentle nature, her love of stories, her ability to find joy in simple things. But how could this child dream of his wife? How could she know details about their life together that he'd never shared with a living soul? "These dreams," he said slowly, "when did they start?" "I've always had them. Even when I was very little, living in the bad place. The woman in my dreams was like a guardian angel, telling me about somewhere I belonged, somewhere I would be loved and safe." A chill ran down Eli's spine. Could it be possible? Could Sarah somehow be watching over this lost child, guiding her toward what? Toward him. He pushed the thought away. Such thinking led to madness. There had to be a rational explanation. Perhaps Anna had lived nearby before, had somehow observed his household from a distance. Perhaps she'd heard stories from other community members. Children had vivid imaginations, after all. They mixed memory and fantasy until the boundaries blurred. But even as he tried to convince himself, doubts gnawed at his certainty. The birthmark was too specific, too exact a match. The details she knew were too intimate, too particular to his and Sarah's private life. "Anna," he said, "I need to find your family. People must be looking for you, worried about you. Can you remember anything else about where you came from?" Her face darkened. "I don't want to go back to them. The man who said he was my father, he wasn't kind. He had angry eyes and rough hands. When I ran away, he chased me through the woods, shouting terrible things. But surely there's someone—" "No." A voice carried a finality that surprised him. "I don't belong with them. I never did. I belong here." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Eli wasn't ready to examine. This child, this mysterious, impossible child, claimed to belong in his house, in his life. The very thought was absurd. Yet something deep in his chest responded to her words with a longing he'd thought buried forever. "You can stay tonight," he heard himself say. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do." Relief flooded her small face. "Thank you," she whispered as evening fell. Eli found himself in the strange position of caring for a child again. He prepared a simple meal of bread and soup, helped Anna wash and change into Sarah's old dress, which fit her surprisingly well, and made up a bed for her on the small couch in the front room. As he tucked a quilt around her, Anna looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold depths far beyond her years. "She would be proud of you," she said softly. "Who would?" "The woman from my dreams. The one with the gentle hands and the birthmark like mine. She would be proud of how you took care of me today." Eli's breath caught. Before he could respond, Anna's eyes drifted closed, and within minutes she was sleeping peacefully. He stood watching her for a long time. This child who spoke of Sarah as if she knew her, who carried the mark of his lost family on her palm. That night, for the first time in 30 years, the silence in Eli's house didn't feel quite so heavy. Something had shifted in the careful balance of his solitary existence. Something that both thrilled and terrified him. In the barn behind the house, forgotten beneath layers of dust and sorrow, Hannah's cradle sat in the shadows. The cradle he'd carved with such love and hope, painted with such tender dreams of fatherhood. Tomorrow, he would have to decide what to do about Anna. Tonight, he simply listened to the sound of a child breathing safely under his roof and wondered if miracles came wrapped in mystery. Outside, the October wind whispered through the pines, carrying secrets that only the forest knew. And in the graveyard behind the house, beneath the weathered stones that marked his greatest losses, something stirred in the soil, not physically, but spiritually, as if love, once planted, could never truly die. 3 days passed before Eli could bring himself to venture beyond the boundaries of his farm. 3 days during which Anna settled into his household routine with an ease that both comforted and unsettled him. She seemed to know where everything belonged: the dishes in the cupboard, the wood for the fire, the way to scatter grain for the chickens. More troubling still, she hummed melodies that Eli recognized as Sarah's favorites, songs his wife had sung while working in the kitchen or tending her garden. On the morning of the 4th day, Anna appeared in the kitchen before dawn, having somehow found and donned Sarah's old apron. The sight stopped Eli cold. The apron had hung unused in the pantry for 30 years, tucked behind preserving jars and forgotten supplies. Yet here was this child, wearing it as naturally as if she'd done so every morning of her life. "I thought I could help with breakfast," she said, seemingly unaware of the impact her appearance had on him. "I know how you like your eggs soft, with the yolks barely set. And the coffee should be strong enough to wake the dead, but not so bitter it hurts your teeth." Eli sank into his chair, watching as Anna moved about his kitchen with practiced efficiency. She knew exactly where to find the eggs, exactly how much coffee to measure, exactly how hot to make the stove. Her movements held the confident familiarity of long habit, as if she'd prepared breakfast in this kitchen 1,000 times before. "Anna," he said carefully, "who taught you to cook?" She paused, a wooden spoon halfway to her mouth as she tested the porridge. "I don't remember anyone teaching me. I just know things. Like how you take your coffee with just a touch of honey because sugar makes your stomach upset. Or how you like your bread, thick sliced and toasted golden." These were details Eli had never shared with anyone, preferences so specific and personal that even his closest neighbors wouldn't know them. Yet this child spoke of them as casually as discussing the weather. The family Bible sat on a shelf near the kitchen window, its leather binding worn smooth by generations of Yoder hands. Anna's gaze kept drifting toward it as she worked, and finally, she set down her spoon and approached the shelf. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the heavy book. Eli nodded, curious to see what would draw her to it. The Bible contained more than scripture. Pressed between its pages were flowers Sarah had dried, family records written in careful German script, and small mementos of their life together. Things no one else had ever seen. Anna opened the Bible with reverence, her small fingers turning the pages as if she knew exactly what she sought. She stopped at the book of Psalms, where a dried violet lay pressed between the pages, a flower Sarah had picked on their first anniversary, saved as a token of their happiness. "She picked this by the creek where you used to walk together," Anna said softly, touching the delicate petals with one finger. Every spring, when the violets bloomed, she would take one and press it in her Bible. She said it was her way of keeping pieces of happiness forever. The words hit Eli like physical blows. Sarah had indeed collected violets every spring, though she'd never explained her reasoning to him. He'd simply known that certain pages of their Bible held dried flowers, a sweet quirk of his sentimental wife. But Anna spoke as if she'd been there, as if she'd witnessed Sarah's careful ritual of preserving beauty. "How do you know that?" he whispered. Anna looked puzzled by the question. "She told me. In my dreams, she shows me things. Happy memories of the life you built together. She says I need to understand what love looks like so I'll recognize it when I find it." Eli's hands trembled as he took the Bible from her. The pressed violet crumbled slightly at his touch, 30 years having made it fragile as whisper. "Tell me about these dreams, Anna. Tell me everything." She settled onto the floor beside his chair, her legs folded beneath her in a posture that reminded him painfully of Sarah during their evening conversations. "They started when I was very little, maybe 3 or 4 years old. I was living with people who didn't love me. They just kept me because someone paid them to. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I would see her. What did she look like? Beautiful. She had dark hair like mine, but longer, and she always wore it braided. Her hands were gentle, with calluses from garden work. And she had the birthmark." Anna held up her own marked palm, right here, shaped like a star. Eli closed his eyes, remembering. Sarah's hair had indeed been long and dark, kept in a neat braid that fell to her waist. Her hands had been work-worn, but gentle, soft when they touched his face or stroked his hair. And the birthmark, God help him, the birthmark had been exactly as Anna described. "In the dreams, she would sit beside my bed and tell me stories," Anna continued. "Stories about this place, about morning walks through the woods, about chickens who had names and personalities, about a garden where she grew the most beautiful flowers in all of Pennsylvania, about a man who worked hard and loved deeply, who built things with his hands and had a heart big enough to hold the whole world." "She told you about me?" Anna nodded solemnly. "She said you were the finest man she'd ever known. That you deserved. To be happy, to have a family, to hear laughter in your house again. She worried about you being alone, about how you'd shut yourself away from joy because the pain was too great to bear." Tears blurred Eli's vision. These were thoughts he'd never voiced, struggles he'd never shared with another soul. The weight of isolation, the fear that his heart had grown too cold to love again, the gradual acceptance that he might live out his days in solitude. These were private battles fought in the dark hours before dawn. "She told you all of this?" "She told me I had a purpose," Anna said. "That someday, when I was old enough and strong enough, I would find my way home. She said home wasn't just a place. It was people who loved you, who saw you for who you really were. She said when I found you, I would know I belonged." The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle bubbling of the porridge on the stove. Eli stared at this impossible child who spoke of his dead wife as if they were intimate friends, who knew details of his private life that no living person should possess. "Anna," he said finally, "show me your hands." She held them out willingly. Besides the star-shaped birthmark on her right palm, her hands were unremarkable, small, soft, with the slight calluses that came from farm work. But as Eli examined them more closely, he noticed something that made his breath catch. On her left wrist, barely visible beneath the sleeve of Sarah's old dress, was a small scar. Crescent-shaped, pale with age, but unmistakable. He'd seen that scar before. Sarah had carried an identical mark in the exact same place. A childhood reminder of a fall from her father's barn. "Where did you get this scar?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Anna looked down at her wrist as if seeing the mark for the first time. "I've always had it. I don't remember how it happened. It's just part of me." Eli released her hand and turned away, his mind reeling. One inexplicable similarity could be dismissed as coincidence. Two might be explained by chance. But the accumulation of impossible details, the birthmark, the scar, the intimate knowledge of his and Sarah's private life, demanded an explanation that his rational mind couldn't provide. Yet what was the alternative? That his wife's spirit lived on, guiding this lost child toward the home she'd left behind? That love could transcend death, reaching across the void to offer second chances to those who'd given up hope? "Eli?" Anna's voice was small, uncertain. "Are you angry with me?" He turned back to find her watching him with worried eyes, her small face creased with concern. In that moment, she looked exactly like what she was, a frightened child who'd found temporary shelter, but feared it might be taken away. "No, little one," he said gently. "I'm not angry. I'm just trying to understand." "I know it's strange," she said. "I know I say things that don't make sense. The people I lived with before, they said I was touched in the head, that I told lies and made up stories. But I wasn't lying. I was just trying to share what she showed me." The pain in her voice cut through Eli's confusion. Whatever the explanation for Anna's presence in his life, whatever mysterious forces had brought her to his woods, one thing was clear. She was a child in need of love and protection. Everything else, the questions, the impossibilities, the implications that challenged everything he thought he knew about life and death, could wait. "You're not lying," he told her firmly. "And you're not touched in the head. You're a little girl who's been through terrible things, and you deserve kindness and care. Whatever else is true, that much I know for certain." Relief flooded her features. "Can I stay? Just a little longer?" Eli looked at her sitting on his kitchen floor, wearing Sarah's apron and speaking with Sarah's gentle wisdom, carrying Sarah's birthmark and somehow holding pieces of Sarah's memories. Logic demanded that he seek answers, that he contact the authorities, that he find her proper family and return her to where she belonged. But looking at Anna's hopeful face, breathing in the warmth and life she'd brought to his empty house, Eli found himself believing in possibilities he'd never dared consider. Maybe miracles did happen. Maybe love could find a way to bridge the impossible distance between the living and the dead. Maybe second chances came disguised as lost children who carried star marks on their palms and knew the secret longings of lonely hearts. "Yes," he said quietly, "you can stay." Outside, the October wind rustled through the trees that bordered his property, carrying whispers of change. In the barn, dust motes danced in the morning light filtering through the windows, settling like blessings on the forgotten cradle that had waited 30 years for another child to call it home. The decision to seek answers came on a morning when Anna woke from troubled sleep, speaking words that chilled Eli to his bones. "She's crying," Anna whispered, sitting up in her makeshift bed with tears streaming down her face. "She's crying because she couldn't tell you the truth before she died. She says there are things you need to know, things about the night your baby was born." Eli had been preparing breakfast, but Anna's words made him drop the wooden spoon he'd been holding. It clattered to the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning silence. "What did you say?" "The woman in my dreams, she's different today. Sadder, She keeps saying she should have told you, that secrets hurt more than truth ever could. Anna wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She says there's someone you need to talk to, someone who knows what really happened. For 30 years, Eli had accepted the story of Hannah's birth and death as complete, unchangeable truth. His daughter had been stillborn, a tragedy, but not uncommon in those days. Sarah had grieved herself to death over their loss. These were facts he'd lived with, carried like stones in his chest, never questioning because the pain of examining them too closely seemed unbearable. But now Anna spoke of secrets, of things he needed to know. And despite every rational objection his mind could muster, he found himself believing her. Who? He asked quietly. Who am I supposed to talk to? Rebecca, the woman who helped bring babies into the world. She has a leather book where she writes everything down. You need to see what she wrote about that night. Rebecca Stoltzfus. Of course it would be Rebecca. The old midwife had delivered half the children in their community over the past 50 years, had been present at more births and deaths than anyone else in the county. If there were secrets about Hannah's birth, Rebecca would know them. The walk to Rebecca's house took 20 minutes through paths that wound between neighboring farms. Anna insisted on coming along, despite Eli's protests that the conversation might not be suitable for young ears. She needs me there, Anna said, with that unnerving certainty that had become her hallmark. Rebecca won't tell you the truth unless I'm with you. She's been carrying secrets too long. She needs someone to help her let them go. Rebecca Stoltzfus lived in a tidy house on the far side of the valley, surrounded by herb gardens that supplied her midwifery practice. At 82, she was one of the oldest members of their community, respected for her skill and wisdom. Her weathered hands had guided countless babies into the world, had closed the eyes of those who couldn't make the journey from womb to life. She answered her door wearing the surprised expression of someone who rarely received unexpected visitors. But when her eyes fell on Anna, something shifted in her features' recognition, perhaps, or something deeper and more troubling. Eli Yoder, she said slowly, her gaze never leaving Anna's face. What brings you to my door after all these years? We need to talk, Rebecca, about the night Hannah was born. The old woman's face went pale. She stepped back, gesturing them inside with hands that trembled slightly. Her kitchen was neat and orderly, filled with the scents of dried herbs and tinctures. But Eli noticed how Rebecca's eyes kept darting to Anna, as if she were seeing something that defied explanation. This child, Rebecca said finally. Where did you find her? In the woods, 3 days ago. Lost and frightened. Eli paused, then added, She knows things, Rebecca. Things about Sarah, about our life together. Things no child should know. Show her, Anna said quietly, holding up her right hand so the star-shaped birthmark was clearly visible. Rebecca gasped and sank into her chair. The blood drained from her face completely, leaving her looking every one of her 82 years. Dear God, she whispered. How is this possible? That's what we're here to find out, Eli said. Anna says you have a book, a record of the births you've attended. She says there are things about Hannah's birth that I need to know. Rebecca's hands fluttered to her throat, where a small silver cross hung on a delicate chain. I swore I would never speak of it. I gave my word. To whom? Eli's voice was gentle but insistent. Rebecca, whatever happened that night, whatever secrets have been kept, they're causing pain. This child has been through terrible things, and I need to understand why she's here, why she knows what she knows. The old woman looked at Anna for a long moment, studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle written there. Finally, she rose on unsteady legs and moved to a cabinet in the corner of the room. From its depths, she withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. I've kept records of every birth I've attended, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Every success, every failure, every complication. Your Sarah's delivery is recorded here, but not the way you remember it. She opened the journal with reverent care, turning pages until she found the entry she sought. The handwriting was careful, precise, written in the German script of their community. October 15th, 1857, she read aloud. Sarah Yoder, age 22, delivered of twins. First child, female, born at sunset with mark of star upon palm. Second child, also female, born 2 hours later with identical marking. First child breathed briefly, then was taken to the Lord. Second child, strong and healthy, cried lustily upon arrival. The words fell into the silence like hammers striking anvils. Eli felt the world shift beneath his feet, reality rearranging itself into patterns he couldn't comprehend. Twins? He whispered. Sarah had twins? Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. 2 daughters, identical in every way, both marked with the star, just as their mother was. But only one lived through that first night. Then where, how? Eli couldn't form the questions that crowded his mind. Sarah made me swear never to tell you, Rebecca continued, her voice breaking. The grief of losing one child nearly destroyed her. She couldn't bear the thought of you knowing that another had lived, had been. She stopped, unable to continue. Had been what? Eli demanded. Anna stepped forward then, her small hand finding Eli's larger one. Tell him about the man who came in the night, she said softly. Tell him about the money that changed hands. Tell him how they took me away while he slept, grieving for the daughter he thought was his only child. Rebecca's face crumpled completely. There was a man, a stranger, who dealt in such things. Childless couples with money willing to pay for babies they could claim as their own. He'd been watching, waiting for opportunities. When Sarah's labor produced twins, when one died and one lived. You sold my daughter? Eli's voice was deadly quiet. Not I. Rebecca protested. Never I. But Sarah, she was half mad with grief and pain. She convinced herself that the living child would be better off with a family that could give her advantages, opportunities. She made arrangements while you slept, exhausted from the night's vigil. By morning, the child was gone, and Sarah had sworn me to secrecy. The kitchen spun around Eli. Everything he believed about his life, his loss, his wife's character, all of it crumbled in the face of this impossible revelation. Sarah had given away their living daughter, had let him believe both children were dead, had carried this secret to her own grave. The guilt destroyed her, Rebecca said through her tears. She regretted the decision almost immediately, but it was too late. The child was gone, placed with a family far from here. Sarah tried to find her, tried to get her back, but the man who arranged it disappeared. She spent her remaining months tormented by what she'd done, dying as much from shame as from illness. Anna squeezed Eli's hand. She never stopped loving you, she said quietly. Or me. In the dreams, she explains it over and over, how the pain made her think wrong, made her believe lies about what was best. She says grief can make people do terrible things, things they'd never consider with a clear mind. Eli looked down at this child, his daughter, returned to him after 30 years of separation. The star birthmark that had confused and frightened him now made perfect sense. Anna was Hannah's twin sister. The daughter Sarah had given away in a moment of devastating poor judgment. Where have you been all these years? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Anna's face darkened. With people who bought me like livestock. They weren't cruel at first, just cold, indifferent. But as I grew older and started having the dreams, started talking about things I shouldn't know, they grew frightened of me. They thought I was possessed or cursed. The last family, she shuddered. They decided I was more trouble than I was worth. They were going to send me away to an asylum when I ran. How did you find your way here? She guided me. Anna's voice was matter-of-fact, as if supernatural navigation were the most natural thing in the world. In the dreams, she showed me the path through the woods, told me which trails to follow. She said when I reached the place where I belonged, I would know it by the feeling in my heart. Rebecca wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. I should have spoken years ago. Should have told you the truth when Sarah died, at least. But I gave my word, and you did what you thought was right, Eli said, though his voice carried the weight of 30 years of unnecessary grief. Sarah made her choice, and you honored it. The fault isn't yours. But even as he spoke the words of forgiveness, rage burned in his chest. Not at Rebecca, not even entirely at Sarah, but at the circumstances that had robbed him of watching his daughter grow. 30 years of her life lost. 30 years of his own isolation, unnecessary and cruel. Can you forgive her? Anna asked, as if reading his thoughts. She knows what she did was wrong. She's been trying to make it right ever since, watching over me, guiding me back to you. The dreams, they were her way of preparing me, of making sure I'd recognize home when I found it. Eli knelt beside Anna, taking her small face in his hands. Looking at her, he could see Sarah's features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, but he could also see himself in the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she held her head when she was thinking. I don't know if I can forgive her yet, he said honestly, but I know I love you. I know you belong with me, that this is where you should have been all along. Anna smiled then, the first truly carefree expression he'd seen from her. She says that's enough for now. Forgiveness will come when your heart is ready for it. As they walked home through the afternoon sunshine, Eli felt as if he were moving through a dream. The daughter he'd mourned for 30 years walked beside him, chattering about the chickens and asking questions about the farm with the eager curiosity of a child who'd finally found where she belonged. But beneath his joy lay currents of anger and loss that would take time to sort through. 30 years of unnecessary solitude. 30 years of believing himself childless when his daughter had been alive. Growing up with strangers, longing for a home she could barely remember. The sins of the past cast long shadows. But perhaps, just perhaps, love could still find a way to heal what grief had broken. The revelation that Anna was his daughter should have brought Eli peace. But instead, it opened wounds he'd thought long healed. For days after their visit to Rebecca, he found himself walking through his house like a stranger, seeing everything through new eyes. This was the home Anna should have known from birth. These were the rooms where she should have taken her first steps, spoken her first words, grown from infant to child under his loving care. Instead, she'd spent 30 years with people who'd seen her as a commodity, who'd grown to fear her unusual gifts and gentle spirit. The injustice of it aided him like acid. Anna seemed to sense his struggle. She moved through the house with careful quiet, as if afraid that too much noise might shatter whatever fragile peace they'd found. She helped with chores without being asked, prepared meals with the skill of someone far older than her apparent 7 years, and asked no questions about the future. But Eli noticed her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, her young face creased with worry that belonged on someone who'd seen too much of the world's cruelty. It was on a gray October morning, while Anna was feeding the chickens, that Eli finally forced himself to enter Sarah's old bedroom. He'd avoided it for years, unable to bear the memories that lurked in every corner. But now, with truth reshaping everything he thought he knew about his wife, he needed to search for answers. The room looked exactly as Sarah had left it 30 years ago. Her dresses still hung in the wardrobe, smelling faintly of the lavender she'd loved. Her hairbrush sat on the dresser beside the wooden box that held her wedding ring. Even her reading glasses rested on the small table by the window, as if she might return at any moment to finish the letter she'd been writing. The letter? Eli's breath caught as he remembered. Sarah had been working on something in the days before. Her death, a letter she'd hidden whenever he entered the room. At the time, he'd assumed it was correspondence with family, perhaps arrangements for her own burial. But now, with new knowledge burning in his mind, he wondered if it might contain explanations she couldn't bring herself to speak aloud. He searched the room methodically, checking drawers and boxes, looking behind furniture and inside books. Finally, in the very back of her wardrobe, behind the blue dress she'd worn on their wedding day, he found it. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age, with his name written across the front in Sarah's careful script. His hand shook as he broke the wax seal and unfolded the pages within. My dearest Eli, if you are reading this, then God has finally called me home, and I pray He has also given you the strength to forgive what I am about to confess. I have carried this burden for too many months, and it has poisoned every breath I've drawn since that terrible night. You know, we lost our Hannah, but you do not know that we were also blessed with another daughter, her twin sister, born too. Hours later, with the same star birthmark, the same precious features. She lived, Eli. She drew breath and cried and reached for me with tiny, perfect fingers. I held her for only moments before the madness took me. The grief of losing Hannah had already begun eating at my mind, and when I saw this living child, this reminder of what we'd lost, I convinced myself she would be better off elsewhere. There was a man who dealt in such arrangements, who promised she would go to a good family with means to give her advantages we could never provide. By the time reason returned to me, it was too late. Our daughter was gone, and I had no way to find her. I searched, Eli. I wrote letters, made inquiries, but the man who took her had vanished like smoke. I realized too late that I had not saved her from poverty. I had stolen her from love. I wanted to tell you, tried 1,000 times, to find the words. But how could I confess that while you grieved for one lost daughter, I had given away another? How could I explain that your grief was pure and honest while mine was tainted with the guilt of my terrible choice? I am dying, my beloved, and not entirely from illness. Shame has eaten at me like a cancer, growing stronger each day as I see how my decision has wounded us both. You have mourned children you thought were lost forever, when one of them lives and breathes somewhere beyond our reach. If God is merciful, perhaps someday our living daughter will find her way home to you. Perhaps the love we poured into this house, the prayers we offered for the children we never raised, will somehow call her back to where she belongs. I pray she will forgive her mother's moment of madness, and that you will find room in your heart to love her despite the sins that shaped her journey. Watch for her, my darling. She carries our mark, the star on her palm that marked all the women in my family. If she comes to you, know that she is truly ours, truly yours. Love her as I should have loved her. Give her the home I stole from her in my grief. I go to my grave carrying more regret than any heart should hold, but also carrying more love than death can diminish. Wait for her, Eli. Believe she will come home. Your Sarah. Eli read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Sarah had known, had searched, had died not just from grief over Hannah's death, but from guilt over giving Anna away. The woman he'd idealized in his memory, whose perfection had made his 30 years of solitude feel like a shrine to lost love, had been human after all, capable of terrible mistakes born from unbearable pain. She's been trying to tell you for years. Eli spun around to find Anna standing in the doorway, her small frame silhouetted against the morning light. She'd approached so quietly, he hadn't heard her footsteps. How long have you been there? Long enough. Anna entered the room and climbed onto Sarah's old bed, settling cross-legged on the faded quilt. She's been whispering about that letter, in my dreams, saying it held the words she couldn't speak before she died. She was afraid you'd hate her if you knew the truth. Do you hate her? Eli asked, sitting heavily in Sarah's rocking chair. Anna considered the question with the seriousness of someone far older than her years. I used to. When I was little, and the people who bought me were cruel, I hated the mother who gave me away. But the dreams changed that. She showed me how the pain made her think wrong, how losing Hannah broke something in her mind. She didn't give me away because she didn't love me. She gave me away because she loved me too much to think clearly. Eli stared at his daughter, this wise, wounded child who spoke of forgiveness with the authority of someone who'd earned the right to withhold it. How can you be so understanding? You lost 30 years of your life because of her choice. But I found my way back, Anna said simply, and now I know where I belong. The years I lost, they're gone, and hating won't bring them back. But the years I've left, those are still mine to live. She slipped off the bed and moved to the window, looking out at the farm that should have been her childhood home. Besides, she never really left me. Even when I was with people who didn't understand me, who feared my dreams and my knowing things, she was there, protecting me the only way she could, preparing me for the day I'd find my way home. Eli joined her at the window, following her gaze across the fields he'd worked alone for so many years. What happens now? Now we learn to be a family, Anna said, slipping her small hand into his larger one. Now we make new memories to balance the old sadness. Now we trust that love is stronger than the mistakes that tried to keep us apart. The letter crinkled in Eli's other hand as he squeezed it gently. Sarah's words, finally spoken, finally heard. Her confession of guilt, her desperate hope for redemption, her faith that love could find a way across any distance. She says, "There's something else you need to know," Anna said quietly. "Something about the man who took me. He's still alive, still stealing children from families like ours. She's worried he might come looking for me if he learns I've found my way back." A chill ran down Eli's spine. In his joy at finding Anna, in his struggle to process the revelations about Sarah, he'd given little thought to practical dangers. But Anna was right. If she'd been sold once, whoever had arranged it might try to reclaim what they saw as their property. "Tell me about him," Eli said. Anna's face darkened. In the dreams, she calls him the Shadow Man. He moves between communities, finding families in crisis, children who might not be missed right away. He has papers that make his thefts look legal, badges that make people trust him. The family who raised me, they bought me through him, thinking it was all proper and lawful. Do you remember anything about him from your own experience? Only pieces. A tall man with cold eyes who came in the night. He had a badge, some kind of law officer, or pretending to be one. He told the people who bought me that I was an orphan, that he was finding good homes for children who had no one. Ellie's jaw tightened. How many children? Dozens, maybe more. She shows me glimpses in the dreams, other families torn apart, other children sold to the highest bidder. He's been doing this for years, and he's never been caught because people trust the badge. The implications hit Eli like physical blows. His daughter hadn't been the victim of one terrible mistake. She'd been caught in a web of organized crime that had destroyed countless families. And if this Shadow Man was still operating, still stealing children, we have to stop him, Eli said. Anna nodded gravely. She says that's why I was guided back to you. Not just to heal our family, but to end his crimes. She says the truth is the only weapon strong enough to bring him down. Outside, storm clouds gather on the horizon, promising rain before nightfall. But inside Sarah's old bedroom, surrounded by the ghosts of choices made and unmade, Eli felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years, a sense of purpose that extended beyond his own grief. His daughter had been returned to him through what could only be called a miracle. Now it was time to ensure that other families wouldn't suffer the losses that had shaped his life. Time to turn private pain into protection for those who couldn't protect themselves. Time to hunt the Shadow Man who stole children in the night. The investigation began with Rebecca's careful records, but it quickly expanded beyond anything Eli had imagined. The old midwife, freed from her burden of secrecy, proved to be a valuable ally in uncovering the scope of the Shadow Man's crimes. I always wondered about some of the families who lost children, Rebecca admitted as they sat in her kitchen, poring over decades of birth records. Stillbirths that didn't feel right. Twins where only one survived. Mothers who died with guilt in their eyes rather than simple grief. She pulled out several files, each containing documentation that seemed incomplete or suspicious. Here, the Metzger family, 1861. Twins born. One supposedly died. But Lena Metzger kept asking me strange questions in the weeks that followed. Wanted to know if I was certain the child had truly passed. I thought it was grief talking, but now you. Think one twin was sold, Eli finished. And here, the Kaufmans in 1865. Their son was supposedly stillborn, but the child was perfectly formed, showed no signs of distress during labor. The father was away on business when it happened, came home to find his wife half mad with grief, and no body to bury. Anna, who had been quietly listening while sketching in a notebook, looked up with troubled eyes. She shows me these families in the dreams. So many broken hearts, so many parents who suspected but never knew for sure. The Shadow Man was careful. He only took from families where the truth could be hidden. Eli studied his daughter's drawings. With growing unease, she'd somehow captured details about families she'd never met, children she'd never seen. In one sketch, a woman wept over an empty cradle, while a man in a badge-bearing uniform slipped away into the night. In another, twins lay side by side, but only one had open eyes. How many children do you think he's taken over the years? Eli asked. Rebecca's face was grim. If my suspicions are correct, dozens, maybe more. And if he's still operating, he is, Anna said with certainty. She warns me about it in every dream now. He's been careful to work in different counties, different communities, never staying in one place long enough to establish a pattern. But the pattern exists if you know how to look for it. That evening, Eli made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. He drafted letters to ministers and community leaders throughout the region, asking them to review their records for unexplained infant deaths, suspicious adoptions, or families whose grief seemed tinged with something beyond natural loss. The responses began arriving within days, and they painted a picture more horrifying than Eli had imagined. Letter after letter described situations that matched Rebecca's suspicions, children who disappeared under circumstances that never quite made sense, families torn apart by losses that left more questions than answers. Brother Jacob Zimmerman from Lancaster County wrote of 3 families in his congregation who had lost children under similar circumstances, all births attended by a traveling midwife who disappeared shortly after, all involving a law officer who handled the arrangements for burial. Minister Samuel Lapp from Berks County described a pattern of infant deaths that coincided with visits from a deputy sheriff who claimed to be investigating baby theft in the region, a man who seemed unusually interested in which families had money and which did not. Most chilling of all was a letter from Bishop David Stoltzfus in Lebanon County, Rebecca's own nephew, who had been tracking similar suspicions for years. He wrote of a network that extended beyond their Amish communities, reaching into German Lutheran and Mennonite families as well, anyone whose children might blend seamlessly into similar communities elsewhere. The man we seek has multiple identities, Bishop David's letter explained. Sometimes he appears as Deputy Marshal William Hayes, sometimes as Sheriff's Detective James Morrison. Always with proper-looking credentials, always with a story about helping orphan children find good homes. He targets families in crisis, mothers who die in childbirth, fathers killed in accidents, situations where children might genuinely need placement. Anna read the letter over Eli's shoulder, her young face pale with recognition. Those were the names the people who bought me knew him by. Deputy Hayes. That's what they called him when they spoke of the man who brought me to them. Can you remember anything else about him? Anything that might help us identify him? Anna closed her eyes, concentrating. He had a scar here on his left cheek, shaped like a fishhook. And his hands were soft, like someone who'd never done real work. But his eyes were like winter ice, cold and empty. She opened her notebook and began sketching, her pencil moving with the confidence of someone drawing from clear memory. The face that emerged was unremarkable except for the scar and the predatory intelligence in the eyes. A man who could blend into any crowd while hiding a nature that fed on others' suffering. She says he's coming, Anna whispered as she put the finishing touches on the drawing. Soon, someone told him that a child matching my description was seen in this area. He's worried that I might remember enough to expose him. Fear spiked through Eli's chest. When? Days, maybe a week. She's not sure. The dreams aren't always clear about time. But she's certain he knows I'm here. She says we need to be ready. Need to have proof of his crimes before he arrives. That night, Eli sat at his kitchen table surrounded by letters, birth records, and testimonies from families across 3 counties. The evidence was overwhelming, but circumstantial enough to convince him that Anna's shadow man was real and dangerous. But perhaps not enough to convince authorities, who might be reluctant to believe such an extensive conspiracy. We need more, he said aloud, though Anna had already gone to bed. We need something undeniable. As if summoned by his words, Anna appeared in the doorway wearing her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She says there's a place where he keeps records of his own. Proof of all the children he's stolen, all the money he's been paid. But it's dangerous. He's hidden it somewhere only he knows about. Where? A house where he stays sometimes, in a town between here and Philadelphia. She can see it in pieces, a white house with green shutters, near a church with a tall spire. There's a basement where he keeps the papers locked in a strongbox. Eli stared at his daughter, this child who spoke of supernatural visions as casually as describing the weather. 3 weeks ago, he would have dismissed such claims as fantasy. Now, having seen too much evidence of Anna's impossible knowledge, he found himself planning a journey based on dreams and ghostly guidance. How far? 2 days' ride, maybe 3. But we can't go alone. She says he has people watching the roads, people who work for him. We need help from someone he won't suspect. Who? Anna's smile was sad but determined. Bishop David, she says. He's been hunting the Shadow Man for years, gathering evidence like we are. He has resources we don't, connections that could help us get the proof we need. The next morning brought an autumn storm that turned the roads to mud and filled the air with the scent of dying leaves. Eli spent the day drafting a letter to Bishop David, explaining Anna's presence and the revelations about the Shadow Man's identity. He enclosed the sketch Anna had drawn and copies of the most damning evidence they'd gathered. As he sealed the letter, Anna touched his arm gently. She wants you to know she's proud of you. For protecting me, for seeking justice for the other families. She says this is what love looks like. Not just keeping the people you care about safe, but making the world safer for everyone. Will she be able to guide us when the time comes? When we face him? Anna's expression grew troubled. She's growing fainter in the dreams, as if her purpose is almost fulfilled, and she's ready to rest. She says once the Shadow Man is stopped, once the truth comes out, she'll finally be able to let go of the guilt that's kept her bound to this world. The thought of losing Sarah's presence again, even the supernatural version that spoke through Anna's dreams, brought a pang of loss. But Eli understood. His wife had spent 30 years in a kind of spiritual purgatory, trying to atone for her moment of devastating judgment. If stopping the Shadow Man could finally give her peace, then we'll stop him, Eli said firmly. Whatever it takes, however dangerous it might be, we'll end this. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley like a promise of the storm to come. But inside his warm kitchen, surrounded by evidence of crimes that demanded justice, Eli felt a fierce determination burning in his chest. His years of isolation had ended the moment he found Anna in the woods. Now his years of purpose were about to begin. The shadow man who stole children would finally face the light of truth. And when he did, he would learn that some fathers would cross any distance, face any danger, to protect not just their own children, but all the children whose cries echoed in the darkness of his crimes. Bishop David's response arrived 3 days later, carried by a messenger who looked as if he'd ridden hard through the night. The letter bore an official seal and was written in the careful script of a man who chose his words with the precision of someone accustomed to life and death. Decisions. Brother Eli, your letter confirms suspicions I have carried for nearly a decade. The man you describe is indeed Deputy Marshal William Hayes, though he has operated under at least 6 different names across 4 states. I have been tracking his movements with the help of law enforcement officials in Philadelphia who share our concerns about his activities. The child you shelter is in grave danger. Hayes learned of her presence in your area 2 days ago through sources I am still attempting to identify. He is traveling toward your community now, armed with falsified documents that claim legal authority to recover stolen property. He has used such papers before to intimidate families into surrendering children they have every right to protect. Am writing to you immediately with 2 trusted allies, Deputy U.S. Marshal Thomas Brenham, who has been investigating Hayes for federal crimes, and Detective Samuel Morrison, no relation to Hayes's false identity, who works with the Philadelphia police. We should reach you by tomorrow evening. Do not attempt to confront Hayes alone. He is desperate now, aware that his network is being exposed. Desperate men make dangerous choices. Keep the child close and trust no one wearing a badge until you can verify their identity through me personally. Hold fast. Justice approaches. Bishop David Stoltz Vasily read the letter twice before its full implications sank in. The shadow man was coming not in days or weeks, but perhaps within hours. And he was bringing the false authority of law enforcement, the kind of official intimidation that had allowed him to steal children for years. She knows, Anna said from behind him. She'd approached silently, her face pale with the strain of whatever dreams had visited her the night before. She woke me 3 times last night, warning me. He's closer than Bishop David thinks already in the county, asking questions about strange children and grieving widowers. How long do we have? Hours, not days. She says he stopped at the Brenman farm this morning, asking if they'd seen a lost girl. He's working his way toward us, farm by farm. Eli's mind raced. The Brenman farm was less than 5 miles away. At the rate of a careful investigation, Hayes would reach their property by late afternoon. They needed to be ready not just to protect Anna, but to gather the evidence that could finally end his crimes. Anna, do you remember anything about where Hayes might keep his records? Anything more specific than what you told me before? She closed her eyes, concentrating with the intensity of someone trying to recall a half-forgotten dream. There's a leather satchel he always carries locked with brass corners. But the real records, the ones that could destroy him, are hidden somewhere else. She can see glimpses, a stone building, underground, with iron bars on small windows. Jail? Maybe. Or a courthouse basement. Somewhere official, where people wouldn't think to look for stolen documents. Anna opened her eyes, and in them Eli saw fear mixed with determination. She says we need to capture him alive, make him tell us where the records are hidden. Too many families need the truth for him to simply disappear. The sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Through the kitchen window, Eli could see 3 riders cresting the hill that led to his farm. For a moment, his heart hammered with the fear that Hayes had arrived ahead of schedule. Then he recognized the tall figure of Bishop David in the lead, flanked by two men in the dark clothing of federal marshals. "Thank God," Eli breathed, moving toward the door. But Anna caught his arm, a grip surprisingly strong for such a small child. "Wait," she's screaming warnings in my head. "Something's wrong. Those aren't the men Bishop David expected to bring." Even as she spoke, one of the riders raised his hand in what looked like a friendly wave. But the gesture revealed something that made Eli's blood run cold, a distinctive scar on the man's left cheek, shaped exactly like the fishhook Anna had described in her sketch. "Hayes," Eli whispered. The false deputy had somehow intercepted Bishop David, had taken his place, or worse. Now he was approaching Eli's farm with the authority of federal law, carrying documents that would give him legal cover to take Anna and disappear forever. "The barn," Anna whispered urgently. "There's a hiding place she showed me behind the feed bins, where the wall doesn't quite meet the floor. If I squeeze through, I can hide in the space between the walls." It was their only chance. Eli nodded grimly and guided Anna toward the back door. "Go, hide. Don't come out no matter what you hear, no matter what happens." "If I can't stop him, you will," Anna said with fierce certainty. "She believes in you. I believe in you." As Anna slipped out the back door and ran toward the barn, Eli forced himself to walk calmly to his front porch. The three riders were now close enough for him to see their faces clearly. Bishop David looked wrong. His eyes were too hard, his posture too tense. The man Eli had thought was Hayes wore the uniform of a deputy marshal, but something in his bearing suggested violence, barely held in check. The third man hung back slightly, and with a shock of recognition, Eli realized it was the real bishop. David bound and gagged, his clerical clothing torn and stained with blood. He was being kept alive as a prop, a way to legitimize Hayes's approach until it was too late for resistance. "Brother Eli," the false Bishop David called out cheerfully, "we've come about the lost child you've been harboring. These federal marshals have the proper paperwork to take her into protective custody." Eli's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle he kept beside his door, the same weapon his father had used to hunt deer in these woods. Now the only thing standing between his daughter and a life of renewed captivity. "I'm afraid there's been some misunderstanding," Eli said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I haven't harbored any lost children." Hayes, still playing his role as a federal marshal, dismounted with practiced ease. "Come now, Mr. Yoder. We have reliable reports that you've been caring for a young girl, approximately 7 years old, who matches the description of a child stolen from her legal guardians. We're here to return her to her rightful family." And, who might that be? Hayes reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. "The Morrison family of Chester County. They've been searching for their adopted daughter for weeks, ever since she ran away from their home. They're naturally concerned for her welfare." The lies rolled off his tongue with the smoothness of long practice. Eli could see how Hayes had convinced so many families over the years. His manner was authoritative but reasonable. His paperwork appeared legitimate. His story touched on every parent's fear of losing a child to unknown dangers. But Eli had seen Anna's drawings, had read the letters from families across the region, had felt the truth burning in his chest like a coal from hell's own furnace. This man was a predator wearing the mask of protection, a wolf claiming to defend the sheep he devoured. "I'm sure you understand," Hayes continued, stepping onto the porch with casual confidence, "that harboring a stolen child is a federal crime. But given your reputation in the community, I'm willing to believe you acted from good intentions. Simply surrender the child, and we can forget this unfortunate incident ever occurred." Behind Hayes, the real Bishop David struggled against his bonds, his eyes wide with desperation as he tried to warn Eli of the trap closing around them. The false bishop kept one hand near his weapon, ready to drop the pretense if Eli proved uncooperative. "The thing is," Eli said slowly, "I've heard stories about men who steal children under the guise of law enforcement. Men who prey on families in crisis, who turn tragedy into profit. I've heard such men sometimes use false documents and borrowed authority to legitimize their crimes." Hayes's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a coldness that Anna had captured perfectly in her sketch. "Those are serious accusations. Mr. Yoder, I hope you're not suggesting that federal marshals would engage in such activities. I'm suggesting that anyone can buy a badge and forge papers, given enough money and criminal intent." The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Hayes's hand moved closer to his weapon, while his companion shifted position to flank Eli from the side. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the hills, promising another autumn storm. "Perhaps," Hayes said with deadly quiet, "you'd be more cooperative if you understood the consequences of obstructing federal officers in the performance of their duties. Such obstruction can result in severe penalties, imprisonment, loss of property, even charges of kidnapping if you refuse to surrender the stolen child." "And perhaps," Eli replied, his own hand moving toward his rifle, "you'd be more honest if you understood that some fathers will fight any battle, face any danger, to protect their children from wolves in sheep's clothing." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Hayes's mask of official authority slipped completely, revealing the predator beneath. His hand moved toward his gun with the speed of a man accustomed to violence. But Eli had spent 30 years learning patience, 30 years building the quiet strength that came from honest work and righteous purpose. When violence finally came to his doorstep, he was ready for it. The sheriff's badge Hayes wore, tarnished brass with the authority of false law, would be the last prop in a performance that had destroyed too many families, stolen too many children, caused too much pain. The time for pretense was over. The time for justice had finally arrived. The standoff stretched across Eli's front porch like a held breath, each man waiting for the other to make the first move. Hayes had abandoned all pretense. Now, his hand resting openly on his weapon while his eyes calculated distances and angles, the false bishop had moved to flank Eli, cutting off his retreat into the house. But Eli had advantages Hayes couldn't see. This was his land, his home, terrain he knew as intimately as his own heartbeat. More importantly, somewhere in his barn, Anna was hidden safely away from immediate danger, and she carried knowledge that could finally destroy the man who had built a criminal empire on stolen children and shattered families. "You're making a grave mistake, Yoder," Hayes said, his voice dropping the false courtesy that had masked his threats. "I've been taking children from families like yours for 15 years. Amish, Mennonite, Lutheran, you're all the same. Passive, peaceful, unwilling to fight even when everything you love is at stake." "Is that what you told yourself when you stole my daughter 30 years ago?" Eli asked quietly. "That I was too peaceful to seek justice?" For the first time since arriving, Hayes looked genuinely surprised. "Your daughter died in infancy." "I remember the case, tragic stillbirth. Mother died of grief shortly after." "What are you talking about?" "Sarah gave birth to twins that night. You stole a living child while I slept, convinced my grieving wife to let you take our daughter in exchange for money she thought would ease our poverty. You turned our tragedy into your profit." Hayes's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "The Yoder twin. Dear God, is that who you've been hiding? She's supposed to be with the Morrison family in Chester County, earning her keep as a servant girl. She ran away from the people you sold her to, found her way home through woods that should have been impossible for a child to navigate alone, came back to the father who never knew she existed." The confession seemed to energize Hayes rather than shame him. Then, this is even better than I hoped. Do you have any idea what that particular child is worth? The Morrison family paid me $500 for her 30 years ago, a fortune at the time. If she's developed the strange abilities some of my clients have reported, her value has increased exponentially. Eli's blood ran cold. What abilities? Knowing things she shouldn't know. Seeing things that haven't happened yet. Speaking of, people and places she's never encountered. Hayes smiled with the satisfaction of a predator describing his prey. There are wealthy families in the big cities who pay premium prices for children with such gifts. They believe unusual children bring luck, prosperity, supernatural protection to their households. The full horror of Anna's situation became clear. She hadn't just been sold once. She'd been commodified, turned into a valuable asset to be traded. Among collectors who saw her supernatural gifts as entertainment or advantage. The very abilities that connected her to Sarah, that had guided her home through impossible circumstances, made her a target for people who would exploit and cage her uniqueness. She's not for sale, Eli said, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years accumulated grief and rage. Not anymore. Not ever again. Hayes laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humanity. Everything is for sale, Yoder. Children, families, even justice, if you know the right price to pay. I've built my career on understanding what people value most, then taking it away until they're willing to pay anything to get it back. And how many families have you destroyed in the process? Hundreds, maybe thousands. Every community has families in crisis, children who might disappear without causing too much investigation. The trick is timing taking children during periods of chaos when their loss might seem natural rather than criminal. The casual admission of mass child trafficking hit Eli like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Anna, wasn't just about his own family's tragedy. Hayes had built an entire criminal enterprise on the suffering of parents and children, had turned the most vulnerable moments in human life into opportunities for profit. Where are the records? Eli demanded. Where's the proof of what you've done? Hayes' smile widened. Worried about the other families? Want to give them closure about their lost children? How touching. He gestured toward his saddlebags. I carry basic records with me names, dates, sale prices. But the detailed documentation is safely hidden where no one will ever find it. Tell me where. Why would I do that? Once you surrender the girl, I disappear forever. Retire to California with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life. The families I've destroyed will never know what happened to their children, never have the closure they crave. The cruelty of it, not just stealing children, but denying their families any hope of resolution, ignited something savage in Eli's chest. For 30 years, he'd carried guilt about Hannah's death, grief about Sarah's decline, loneliness that had eaten at him like a cancer. All of it unnecessary, all of it caused by this man's greed and complete absence of human compassion. You're not taking Anna, Eli said with deadly certainty. Not today, not ever. And you're going to tell me where those records are hidden, or what? Hayes interrupted. You'll fight me? You'll violate every principle of your peaceful faith to protect one child? I don't think so, Yoder. Your people turn the other cheek, even when turning it means losing everything you love. It was then that Eli heard it, the sound he'd been waiting for without realizing it. A bell, distant but clear, ringing with the urgent pattern that summoned help in times of crisis. The community bell that called neighbors to aid families facing fire, flood, or other disasters. Anna had found the old bell rope in the barn, had somehow managed to ring the heavy bronze bell that had summoned help for 3 generations of farmers in this valley. Within minutes, neighbors would begin arriving, men who might be peaceful by nature, but who understood that protecting children sometimes required setting peace aside. Hayes heard the bell too, and his expression shifted from confident predator to cornered animal. Clever girl, he muttered. But it won't matter. I have federal authority here, legal documents that trump any local interference. Federal authority based on lies and forged papers, Eli pointed out. When my neighbors arrive, they'll see Bishop David tied up behind you, see the truth about who you really are. For the first time, Hayes looked uncertain. He glanced back at the real bishop, who was struggling against his bonds with renewed vigor, trying to work free the gag that prevented him from shouting warnings. The sound of approaching horses could be heard in the distance. The community, responding to the bell's call with the efficiency of people accustomed to mutual aid. Here's what's going to happen, Hayes said, drawing his weapon fully. You're going to call off your neighbors. Tell them it was a false alarm. Then you're going to produce the girl, and we're going to ride away quietly. If you cooperate, I'll leave you alive. If you don't, he never finished the threat. From somewhere behind the house came the sound of splintering wood, followed by a child's scream of pure terror. Anna's voice, raised in fear and pain. She's not in the barn, Hayes' companion called out. But I found her hiding place-fresh scuff marks, disturbed Hay. She was here, but she's run. Eli's heart hammered against his ribs. Anna had left the safety of her hiding place, had somehow been discovered or forced to flee. She was somewhere on his property, a 7-year-old child being hunted by men who saw her as nothing more than valuable merchandise. Find her, Hayes snarled to his companion. Check the root cellar, the chicken coop, anywhere a child might hide. And be careful, we need her unmarked and cooperative. As the false bishop moved off to search the outbuildings, Hayes turned his full attention back to Eli. Your neighbors will be here soon, but it won't matter. By the time they arrive, I'll have the girl and legal justification for any action I've taken. Federal authority trumps local sentiment, especially when children are involved. The sound of horses grew closer, 3, maybe 4 riders approaching at full gallop. Eli could hear voices calling out, neighbors responding to the bell's summons with the loyalty that bound farming communities together. But would they arrive in time? Would they believe the truth when faced with Hayes' false authority and forged documents? There's something you don't understand about my people, Eli said, raising his voice slightly so the approaching riders might hear. We are peaceful by choice, not by weakness. When our children are threatened, when our families are attacked, peace becomes secondary to protection. Hayes raised his weapon, pointing it directly at Eli's chest. Big words from a man who's about to watch his daughter disappear forever. That's when the first shot rang out, not from Hayes' gun, but from somewhere behind him. The sound of splintering wood followed as a bullet struck the false bishop in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his weapon flying into the dirt. Anna emerged from behind the chicken coop, holding Eli's father's old hunting rifle with the competence of someone who'd been taught to use it properly. Her face was streaked with tears, but her hands were steady as she worked the bolt action to chamber another round. She taught me, Anna said, her voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. In the dreams, she showed me how to load it, how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger slowly so the shot goes true. She said sometimes protecting the innocent requires setting aside everything you thought you believed about yourself. Hayes spun toward this new threat, his own weapon swinging away from Eli, but the moment of distraction was all Eli needed. 30 years of farm work had built strength in his arms and shoulders that now served a purpose beyond plowing fields and hauling hay. He grabbed the rifle he'd kept beside his door and brought it to bear on the man who had destroyed his family, stolen his daughter, and built a criminal empire on other suffering. Drop your weapon, Eli commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. It's over, Hayes. The bell has summoned help. Your companion is wounded, and my daughter has proven she's not the helpless victim you expected. In the distance, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. Soon, Eli's neighbors would arrive to find a federal marshal holding a farmer at gunpoint, or they would find a criminal finally facing justice for decades of unspeakable crimes. The choice of which story they discovered lay in the next few moments, in the decisions made by desperate men with weapons in their hands and everything to lose. The standoff lasted only seconds, but to Eli, it felt like hours. Hayes' weapon was trained on him, while Eli's rifle pointed at the man who had stolen his daughter 30 years ago. Anna stood behind the chicken coop with her own weapon ready, tears streaming down her face, but her hands rock steady. The wounded false bishop writhed in the dirt, clutching his shoulder and cursing in language that would have shocked the real clergyman he'd impersonated. Then the thunder of hoofbeats reached them, and suddenly the farmyard was full of riders. Jacob Brenman arrived first, followed by Samuel Lapp and David Stoltzfus, not the bishop, but his younger brother who farmed the next valley over. Behind them came others, men who had heard the bell and dropped their own work to answer the call for help. "Eli," Jacob called out, taking in the scene with the quick assessment of a man accustomed to emergencies. "What's happening here?" Hayes immediately shifted his stance, adopting the authoritative posture he'd used to intimidate families for decades. "Federal marshals conducting official business," he announced. "This man has been harboring a stolen child, interfering with our attempts to return her to her legal guardians." But Anna stepped out from behind the chicken coop, her rifle still trained on Hayes, her young voice carrying clearly across the farmyard. "He's lying. His name is William Hayes, and he's the man who stole me from my father when I was a baby. He's been stealing children for years, selling them to people who pay him money." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Eli's neighbors looked from Anna to Hayes, trying to make sense of conflicting claims. These were men who'd known Eli for decades, who'd watched him grieve his wife and daughter, who'd respected his solitary life without questioning it. "The child is confused," Hayes said smoothly. "She's been missing from her adoptive family for weeks, living rough in the woods. It's natural she'd be frightened of authority figures, that she'd make up stories to avoid returning to discipline and structure." "Then explain him," Anna said, pointing toward the false bishop who was still bleeding in the dirt. "Explain why the man pretending to be Bishop David is tied up behind your horse while this stranger wears his clothes." All eyes turned toward the horses, where the real Bishop David was indeed bound and gagged, his clerical clothing torn and blood-stained. The sight of an elderly minister treated with such violence sent a ripple of shock through the assembled. Farmers. Jacob Brenman dismounted quickly, moving to free the bishop while keeping a wary eye on Hayes. "David, what happened to you?" As Jacob worked to remove the gag, Bishop David gasped out urgent words. "Imposters, criminals, the child is telling the truth. They ambushed me on the road, forced me to lead them here under false pretenses." The revelation shattered Hayes' facade of authority. Eli's neighbors were peaceful people, but they were not fools. They could see the evidence of violence done to a respected member of their community, could hear the ring of truth in Anna's accusations. "Check his saddlebags," Anna called out. "She says he carries records with him, proof of the children he's stolen, the money he's been paid." Samuel Lapp moved toward Hayes' horse, but the false marshal swung his weapon toward the approaching farmer. "Stay back. I have federal authority here, and I'll use whatever force necessary to protect evidence in an ongoing investigation." "What kind of federal authority ties up bishops and shoots at children?" Jacob demanded, his normally gentle voice hard with anger. Hayes' eyes darted between the assembled men, calculating odds and distances. He was outnumbered, surrounded by people who no longer believed his lies. But cornered animals were often the most dangerous, and Eli could see desperation building in the man's face. "Anna," Eli called softly, "put down the rifle now. You've done enough." "But he'll run," she protested. He'll disappear and steal more children. No, he won't. Not this time. Anna hesitated, then slowly lowered her weapon. The moment she did, Hayes spun toward her with predatory speed, apparently intending to use her as a human shield to secure his escape. He never reached her. Eli's rifle spoke with the voice of 30 years' accumulated rage and grief. The shot took Hayes in the leg, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Not a killing shot. Eli's faith still held him back from that, but enough to end the immediate threat. "That was for my daughter," Eli said quietly, working the bolt to chamber another round. "For Sarah's guilt, for 30 years of unnecessary grief, for all the families you've destroyed." Hayes writhed on the ground, clutching his wounded leg while his weapon lay forgotten in the dirt. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by the whimpering of a man who'd finally met consequences for his crimes. Samuel Lapp reached Hayes's saddlebags and began pulling out their contents. What he found made several of the farmers step back in shock. Records, dozens of them, names, dates, physical descriptions, and most damning of all, sale prices for children stolen across multiple states. "Dear God," Samuel whispered, holding up a ledger book. "There must be 100 children listed here. Names, ages, where they were taken from, who bought them." Anna approached the wounded Hayes with the fearless determination of someone far older than her 7 years. "Where are the rest of the records? The ones you hide somewhere safe?" Hayes glared up at her with hatred and pain. "Go to hell, you little freak. You should have stayed lost." "She doesn't need you to tell her," Anna said with eerie calm. "She's showing me now, the place where you keep the proof that could reunite families, give them closure about their stolen children." She closed her eyes, concentrating with the intensity Eli had learned to recognize. When she opened them again, her voice carried absolute certainty. "Lancaster. The courthouse basement, in a room marked Evidence Storage. You have a key hidden in your boot heel, the left one. The records are in a steel box behind crates of old court documents." Hayes's face went white. "That's impossible. No one knows about that room." "She knows," Anna said simply. "The woman in my dreams, the one who's been guiding me home. She sees everything you've hidden, every secret you thought was safe." Jacob Brenman looked around at the assembled men. "Samuel, David, ride to Lancaster. Find this evidence room. Bring whatever you find back here." "What about him?" Samuel asked, gesturing toward Hayes. "We'll keep him comfortable," Eli said grimly. "Make sure his wounds are tended. After all, we need him alive to face justice for what he's done." As two of the neighbors rode off toward Lancaster, the others set about securing the scene. The false bishop's shoulder wound was bandaged, Hayes's leg wound cleaned and bound. The real Bishop David, freed from his bonds, began examining the records found in Hayes's saddlebags with growing horror. 15 years of crimes, the bishop said, his voice shaking. Children stolen from communities across 4 states. Some sold to families who genuinely wanted children but were willing to ignore questionable paperwork. Others sold to... He stopped, his face pale with disgust. "To collectors," Anna finished. "People who buy unusual children like pets or curiosities. People who think children with special gifts will bring them luck or power." The casual mention of such buyers sent a chill through the assembled men. These were farmers and ministers. People who valued children as blessings from God, rather than commodities to be traded. The idea that anyone would purchase a child for supernatural abilities they might possess was almost incomprehensible. How many children are still missing? Eli asked. Bishop David continued reading through the ledger. Dozens, maybe more. Some of these records go back over a decade. Children who would be adults now, who might have families of their own, who have no idea they were stolen rather than abandoned. I walked over to Hayes, who was propped against a fence post under guard by Jacob Brenman. Despite his wounded condition, His eyes still held the calculating coldness of a predator waiting for opportunity. "The families deserve to know," she said simply. "The children deserve to know where they came from, who they really are. Keeping secrets only causes more pain." Hayes laughed bitterly. "You think knowing will help them? Most of those children have new lives now, new families. Learning they were stolen will only destroy whatever happiness they found." "That's not your choice to make," Anna replied with startling maturity. "Truth belongs to the people it affects, not to the criminals who've hidden it." In the distance, the sound of approaching horses announced the return of Samuel and David from Lancaster. They rode hard, their faces grim with whatever they'd discovered in the courthouse basement. "Found it," Samuel called out as they dismounted. "Exactly where she said it would be. A room full of evidence boxes and his hidden compartment. Behind them must be records for 500 children, going back 20 years. He held up a second ledger, this one larger and more detailed than the first. Names of buyers, amounts paid, even follow-up reports on how the children adapted to their new situations. This man turned child theft into a business enterprise. The weight of Hayes's crimes settled over the farmyard like a dark cloud. 500 children. 500 families destroyed by one man's greed. 500 lives torn apart for profit. But now, finally, there was hope for healing. The records would allow authorities to track down stolen children, to reunite families that have been shattered by lies and false documents. Justice, so long delayed, was finally within reach. Anna looked down at Hayes one last time. "She forgives." "You," she said quietly. "The woman in my dreams, she says holding on to anger only poisons the heart. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean you shouldn't face consequences for what you've done." Hayes stared up at her with something approaching fear. This child he'd tried to steal, who spoke of supernatural guidance and impossible knowledge, represented everything his crimes had attempted to destroy: the bonds between families, the power of love to transcend any distance, the truth that some things were more valuable than money. As the sun set over Eli's farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the community that had rallied to protect one of their own began the work of bringing justice to hundreds of others. The bell that had summoned help still hung silent in the distance, but its call had awakened something that would echo far beyond this single farmyard. The truth, once revealed, could never be hidden again. The trial of William Hayes became the most significant legal proceeding in the county's history. Federal prosecutors arrived from Philadelphia, bringing with them resources that transformed the investigation from a local matter into a nationwide effort to reunite stolen children with their families. The evidence found in Hayes's possession painted a picture of systematic criminality that shocked even seasoned law enforcement officials. Beyond the ledgers documenting individual thefts and sales, investigators discovered a network of corrupt officials, falsified documents, and wealthy buyers who had knowingly participated in child trafficking. Anna proved to be the prosecution's most compelling witness, though her testimony came with challenges no court had previously faced. How did one present evidence gathered through supernatural dreams? How did a legal system built on empirical proof accommodate knowledge that transcended normal human experience? The solution came from an unexpected source: the sheer accuracy of Anna's revelations. Every location she described was found exactly as she'd seen it in her visions. Every hidden cache of documents was recovered precisely where she'd indicated. Her supernatural knowledge, while inexplicable, was undeniably reliable. The defendant kept detailed records. Federal prosecutor James Mitchell explained to the jury during his opening statement. Records that he believed were safely hidden from any earthly investigation. What he couldn't account for was the possibility that truth has a way of surfacing, that justice finds paths beyond human understanding. Hayes, confined to a wheelchair due to his leg wound, maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His defense attorney argued that the charges were based on circumstantial evidence and the fantasies of a traumatized child, that the ledgers spoke for themselves, and Anna's testimony was corroborated by physical evidence at every turn. The courtroom was packed daily with families from across the region, parents who had lost children under suspicious circumstances, adults who had grown up knowing they'd been adopted but never understanding the true nature of their placement. The trial became a focal point for grief that had been carried in silence for decades. One of the most powerful moments came when Rebecca Stoltzfus, now 83, took the stand to describe the night Anna and Hannah were born. Her voice shook as she recounted Sarah's decision to give away the living twin, but she also provided crucial testimony about Hayes's method of operation. He'd preyed on grief, Rebecca said, her eyes fixed on the defendant. He would appear at moments of greatest pain, when families were most vulnerable, offering solutions that seemed like mercy but were actually predation. He turned our capacity for love into a weapon against ourselves. As the trial progressed, investigators worked to trace the children documented in Hayes's records. Some were found living normal lives with families who had believed their adoptions were legitimate. Others had disappeared into systems of exploitation that required delicate investigation by federal authorities. The most heartbreaking discoveries involved children who had been sold multiple times, passed from buyer to buyer like property. Anna's own journey through several families was typical rather than exceptional. Hayes had built his business model on the assumption that unusual children could command premium prices from collectors who saw supernatural abilities as valuable commodities. How many children do you estimate were affected by the defendant's crimes? Prosecutor Mitchell asked during Anna's testimony. Anna closed her eyes briefly, accessing the supernatural knowledge that had guided her home. "She shows me numbers," she said softly. "Over 20 years, more than 600 children were taken. About half were sold to families who wanted children but weren't concerned about proper procedures. The other half went to people who bought them for different reasons." "What kind of reasons?" "Some bought children they thought would bring luck or prosperity. Others collected unusual children, the way some people collect rare objects. A few bought children too." Anna stopped, her young face troubled. "It's all right," the prosecutor said gently. "You don't have to continue." But Anna straightened her shoulders with the determination that had carried her through the woods to find her father. "They need to know. Some people bought children to hurt them, to use their special abilities for bad purposes. She shows me dark places where children were kept like prisoners, where their gifts were exploited until they broke." The courtroom fell silent. Even hardened law enforcement officials shifted uncomfortably at the implications of Anna's testimony. Hayes had not simply stolen children. He had fed them into a network of exploitation that treated them as objects rather than human beings. The defense's cross-examination focused on Anna's age and the supernatural nature of her knowledge. "You claim to receive information from your deceased mother," the defense attorney said. "But you never actually met Sarah Yoder, did you?" "Not in life," Anna replied calmly. "But she's been with me since I was very small, teaching me, protecting me, preparing me for the day I would come home. And you expect this jury to believe in ghosts?" Anna looked directly at Hayes, who had been staring at her with undisguised hatred throughout the trial. "I expect them to believe in love. Love that's strong enough to reach across death, strong enough to guide lost children home, strong enough to bring truth to light no matter how deeply it's been buried." Her words carried a power that transcended legal argument. In that moment, Anna was not just a 7-year-old girl testifying in court. She was the voice of every stolen child, every grieving parent, every family torn apart by crimes they couldn't understand or prevent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. Hayes was sentenced to life imprisonment for kidnapping, child trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. His network of accomplices received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, depending on their level of involvement. But the legal victory was only the beginning of the healing process. Using Hayes's records, federal authorities launched the largest family reunification effort in American history. Teams of investigators worked to track down stolen children, many now adults, and connect them with their birth families. The process was often painful. Some families had moved on, built new lives around their losses. Some stolen children had no memory of their origins and were reluctant to disturb the only families they'd known. But for many, the revelation of truth brought closure that had been decades in the making. Anna played a crucial role in these reunifications, her supernatural knowledge helping investigators locate children who had been moved multiple times or whose records were incomplete. She would study photographs and documents, close her eyes in concentration, then provide details that led searchers to long-lost family members. "She shows me a woman in Ohio," Anna told investigators during one session. "Brown hair, green eyes, scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. She was taken when she was 3, sold to a family named Patterson. They moved west when she was 12, changed her name to Elizabeth. She's married now, has children of her own, but she dreams about people she can't remember." Such sessions were emotionally draining for Anna, but she insisted on continuing the work. "They deserve to know where they came from," she would say, whenever Eli expressed concern about the toll it was taking. Truth helps people heal, even when it hurts at first. The reunifications became a source of hope that spread far beyond the immediate families involved. Communities that had lost children decades earlier finally learned what had happened to their missing members. Adults who had grown up with vague memories of different lives finally understood their origins. One of the most moving reunions involved the Kaufman family, whose son Benjamin had supposedly died as an infant in 1865. Benjamin was now a 47-year-old man living in Chicago, working as a carpenter and father to 3 children of his own. When investigators found him using Anna's guidance, he wept as memories of his earliest years came flooding back. "I always knew something was different," Benjamin told his birth parents during their emotional reunion. "I had dreams about a different family, a different life. I thought they were just fantasies, but they were memories trying to surface." Such stories multiplied as the investigation continued. Families separated by Hayes's crimes were reunited across the span of decades. Children who had been stolen as infants met siblings they'd never known existed. Parents who had mourned their children as dead discovered that love could indeed triumph over the longest separation. The process was not without its complications. Some families struggled to bridge the gaps created by years of separation. Some stolen children found it difficult to accept that their entire understanding of their origins had been based on lies. But for most, the truth, however painful, proved preferable to the uncertainty that had haunted them for years. As autumn turned to winter and the legal proceedings drew to a close, Eli watched his daughter with wonder and pride. Anna had not only survived her ordeal, she had become an instrument of healing for hundreds of other families. Her supernatural gifts, which Hayes had sought to exploit, had instead become a force for justice and reunion. "She's proud of you," Anna told Eli one evening as they sat by the fire, her head resting against his shoulder. "She says you've become the father she always knew you could be." "What about her?" Eli asked. "Is Sarah finally at peace?" Anna was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she accessed the dreams that had guided her home. "She's fading," she said finally. "As the families are reunited, as the truth comes out, her need to stay is ending. She says her work is almost finished." The thought of losing Sarah's presence again brought a pang of grief, but Eli understood. His wife's spirit had remained bound to earth by guilt and unfinished business. As justice was served and stolen children found their way home, her purpose was being fulfilled. Soon, Sarah would finally be able to rest, and Anna would no longer need supernatural guidance to know she was loved and safe. The extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together would settle into the ordinary miracle of a father and daughter learning to be a family. 6 months after the trial, Spring returned to Eli's farm with a gentleness that seemed to acknowledge the healing that had taken place through the winter months. The apple tree Sarah had planted 30 years earlier bloomed with unusual abundance, as if celebrating the restoration of the family they had long watched over. Anna had grown taller through the winter, her face losing some of the haunted quality that had marked her early days home. She moved through the house and farm with the confidence of a child who finally knew where she belonged. Her supernatural gifts settling into a quieter rhythm as the urgent need for otherworldly guidance diminished. The dreams of Sarah still came, but less frequently now, and with a different quality, less urgent warning, more gentle blessing. Anna no longer spoke of receiving critical information through her visions, but rather of feeling surrounded by love and approval as she learned. The ordinary skills of childhood on a working farm. Eli had legally adopted Anna through a process that made national news. The story of the stolen daughter who found her way home through supernatural guidance captured public imagination, but for Eli and Anna, the legal formalities simply confirmed what their hearts had known from the moment he found her in the woods. The adoption papers bore Anna's new official name, Anna Sarah Yoder, honoring both her identity as Eli's daughter and the woman whose spirit had guided her home. The courthouse ceremony was attended by dozens of community members who had watched their reunion with wonder and joy. "It feels strange," Anna confided to Eli as they walked home from the courthouse, "having papers that say I belong to you. I've always known I belonged here. The papers just make it official for everyone else." The farmhouse itself had undergone subtle changes through the winter. Anna's presence had brought life back to rooms that had stood empty for too long. The parlor where Sarah used to sew now held Anna's books and drawings. The kitchen echoed with conversations and laughter rather than the silence of solitary meals. Most significantly, Eli had finally moved Hannah's cradle from the barn into the house, placing it in the room that would have been the nursery 30 years earlier. Not as a shrine to loss, but as a symbol of the family that had been broken and was now, in its own way, made whole. Anna often sat beside the cradle in the evenings, working on her stitching or reading aloud from the family Bible. To observers, it might have seemed she was talking to the empty cradle, but Eli understood she was maintaining connection with the sister she'd never met in life, but who remained part of their family story. The wider work of family reunification continued throughout the region, with Anna serving as an informal consultant when her unique gifts could help locate missing relatives. The federal investigators had established a permanent office in Lancaster, coordinating efforts to trace the hundreds of children documented in Hayes's records. Each success brought its own celebration. When the Miller family of Berks County was reunited with their son after 38 years of separation, the community gathered for a feast that lasted into the night. When elderly Margaret Stoltzfus discovered her daughter was alive and well in Virginia, the tears of joy seemed to water the very ground where the reunion took place. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the gradual healing within Eli himself. The guilt and isolation that had defined his adult life had been replaced by purpose and connection. He was no longer the solitary widower who farmed alone. He was Anna's father, part of a community effort to heal historic wounds, living proof that love could triumph over the most devastating losses. The change was visible to everyone who knew him. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes brighter, his rare smiles came more easily. At community gatherings, he could be found in conversations rather than standing apart. Children who had once stared at him with curiosity now approached him, freely, drawn by Anna's obvious comfort in his presence. "You've become the man Sarah always saw in you," Rebecca Stoltzfus told him one Sunday after services. The man her love revealed, even though grief hid him for so many years. The comment sent Eli to his bedroom that evening, where he opened the wooden box that held Sarah's wedding ring for the first time in months. The sight of the simple gold band no longer brought overwhelming sorrow. Instead, he felt gratitude for the love they had shared, for the daughter their union had created, for the supernatural grace that had brought Anna home. As summer approached, Anna announced her intention to start school in the fall. The one-room schoolhouse that served their district had welcomed the famous child who had helped reunite so many families, and Anna was eager to learn alongside other children her age. "Well, you missed the dreams when they stopped coming?" Eli asked her one evening as they tended the garden together. Anna considered the question seriously, her small hands gentle with the seedlings they were transplanting. "I'll miss her voice," she said finally, "but I won't miss needing her guidance to know I'm loved and safe. That's something I can feel all the time now, just from being here with you." "Do you think she'll ever visit again?" "Maybe sometimes in quiet moments I'll feel her nearby, but not like before when she had urgent things to tell me. Now she can rest, knowing her family is together and the children she helped are finding their way home." That evening, as Eli tucked Anna into her bed, a ritual they had developed over the winter months, she reached for his hand with a seriousness that reminded him of the supernatural wisdom she carried. "She wants you to know something," Anna said, "about the night I was born, about her decision to give me away. She says you need to understand that love sometimes makes people do wrong things, that love also finds ways to make those things right." "I understand," Eli said gently. "I forgave her long ago. She knows. But she also wants you to forgive yourself for not knowing, for not searching, for all the years you thought you'd failed as a father. You never failed. Love doesn't fail, even when circumstances keep it from finding expression." The words carried the weight of divine forgiveness, spoken through a child, but originating from a love that had transcended death itself. Eli felt the total last remnants of guilt and regret lift from his shoulders, replaced by a peace he'd never thought possible. As summer reached its peak, the final reunification efforts began to wind down. Most of the children documented in Hayes's records had been located, most families given the closure they'd sought for decades. Anna's supernatural contributions to the investigation became less frequent, her gifts settling into the background of a normal childhood. The community had adapted to having a child with unusual abilities in their midst. Anna's supernatural knowledge was accepted as part of who she was, like her dark hair or her skill with needlework. The dreams that had once driven urgent action now provided gentle guidance for daily decisions. And even that was fading as Anna learned to trust her own judgment. On a warm August evening, as fireflies danced in the twilight and the air filled with the songs of crickets, Anna and Eli sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. It was a scene of perfect domestic peace, the kind of moment Sarah had dreamed of when she'd planted her apple trees and sewn her curtains and planned a life of simple happiness. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me in the woods that day?" Anna asked. Eli considered the question, thinking of all the pain that had been healed, all the families that had been reunited, all the children who had found their way home because of Anna's gifts. "I think you would have found another way. Love that's strong doesn't give up. It keeps trying until it succeeds." Anna nodded, satisfied with the answer. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, she spoke once more, her voice carrying the certainty that had marked all her supernatural pronouncements. "She says goodbye now. Not forever, but for now. She says to tell you that seeing us together, seeing how you've learned to be happy again, is better than any prayer she could have offered. She says love wins, always. It just sometimes takes longer than we expect. With those words, the extraordinary chapter of their reunion drew to a close. Anna would continue to grow and learn, developing into the remarkable woman her gifts suggested she would become. Eli would continue to be her father, giving her the love and stability that had been stolen from her first 7 years. But the supernatural urgency that had brought them together was ending, replaced by something even more precious, the ordinary miracle of a family learning to behold God in the distance. The church bell that had summoned help during their crisis rang the hour, its bronze voice carrying across the valley like a benediction. But it was no longer a call for aid. It was simply marking time in a community of peace, where lost children had found their way home and broken families had discovered that love could indeed triumph over any distance, any loss, any shadow that tried to keep them apart. The last photograph in the family album, placed there deliberately by Eli as a symbol of their new beginning, showed father and daughter standing together in front of their farmhouse, Anna's hand in his, both smiling, with the quiet joy of people who had found exactly where they belonged. It was an image that captured not just a moment in time, but the fulfillment of promises made across the veil between life and death. The proof that some stories have endings happy enough to heal even the deepest wounds. In that photograph, in that moment, in that simple farmhouse surrounded by Sarah's apple trees, the star-shaped birthmark that had started their journey was no longer a mystery to be solved. It was simply the mark that identified Anna as belonging exactly where she was, in the arms of the Father who had never stopped loving her, even when he didn't know she existed.